Hey everybody, welcome to the lesson here at THSS Technology. Today we're going to keep building on our Godot game here by creating some projectiles and then instantiating those projectiles from our tower scenes. So let's get started. So I'm going to start by creating a new scene up here. It's going to be a 2D scene. We're going to rename it to Projectile. On that we're going to add a Sprite 2D. For the Sprite 2D, no, I haven't made a projectile yet, so let's take our good old friend, the Godot icon here, to kind of drag that in. So let's take our Godot icon, drag it into the texture here. That's a bit too big for a projectile, so we're going to change the transform down to 0.15 or so. Now remember, always when you're changing the size of your sprites, make sure you're changing the sprite node and not the root parents node there. All right, so I'm going to click back on the parent node, and we're going to add an area 2D. Okay, so the area 2D is a node that detects collisions with it. Now, we're getting a warning here because we haven't created the collider that is going to actually detect the collisions for the area 2D. So with the area 2D selected this time, we're going to add a collision shape 2D. We're getting an error there because we haven't identified the shape, so let's create a new rectangle shape. And there we go. Let's save our scene, put it in our scenes folder, we'll call it projectile. And now let's start by adding the script onto our projectile. So let's attach a script. As always, please to make sure that you're putting everything in the correct folder. And we're going to create our script here. Bigger for everyone to see. Okay, so let's start by creating the variables that we're going to use in this script. Okay, we're going to create a variable called speed. We'll make it equal to 400, which is actually just going to be 400 pixels per second effectively once we apply delta to it. I do want everyone in the class to remember to make sure you're commenting your code, adding your comments in a language that makes it understandable for you. Okay, so let's make another variable. Let's call it damage, and we'll set the damage equal to 25. Now this is an arbitrary number. Essentially, I am setting this to think about my enemy script because my enemy has a max health here of 100. So my projectiles are going to take 4 projectiles to actually kill the enemy. All right, and the last thing we're going to do is we're going to create a variable called direction. This is going to be the direction at which our projectile is going to be moving. Now, in the future, we're going to have the directions going to be set by the nearest enemy to the tower. We're going to cover that in a week or two, but for now, we're just going to have the direction of our object moving in a very set directional path. So this direction is going to be a vector 2, so it's going to be looking for some x, y coordinates, and I'm just going to zero it out, which is just going to make it 0, 0, and it's going to be sitting there waiting for input. Okay, let's get down to our functions now. Okay, so we're going to declare it as a function, and then we'll do our good friend physics process delta. And remember, that function, anything in this code, is going to run every frame, 60 frames a second. The delta is going to slow it down to that nice even 60 number, so it'll be frame rate independent. So faster computers will still run at the same time as a slower computer will. All right, so in our physics process delta, we're going to take the position of the object. Now, position is a bit of a code that Godot recognizes. And just a reminder, if you hover over top of any of these commands here we're issuing our code, it does give you a little bit of an example. And if you control click on it, you'll actually get the documentation will open up and you can make some more adjustments there. So we're going to take our position and we're going to add to our position. So plus equals to add, of course. And we are going to add our direction, which is currently 0, 0. We'll fix that later, times our speed, and then we're going to times that to delta. We're timesing by delta again, just to assure that we are moving consistently, frame rate independently. Okay, excellent. So now that is what is going to happen when our projectile is moving. Perfect. Okay. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to access this area 2D node now. And to do that, we're going to use a signal. This isn't the first time we've done a signal. We did our signal when we had the timer function in our main script on the timer timeout. So in order to activate a signal, first we click on the node, and then we're going to go over here to the right-hand side. Normally we have our inspector, and we're going to click on the node tree. The signal we're actually looking for is called body enters, which is going to detect if any body enters the collision shape we put on this object. What is a body? Well, if you remember when we made our enemy, the root node for here is a character body 2D. So that's the body that's going to detect, but it'll also detect rigid bodies as well, which you might use later in the code. So once again, we're going to click on our area 2D, click on the node tab, and we're going to connect that on body entered. All right, so now we don't want this to trigger whenever any body enters this. We're looking specifically for our enemies, and there's a bunch of ways we could do this. We could use tags, groups, but what we're going to do is something a little bit different just to kind of expand our knowledge here. We're going to control this with a very simple if statement, okay? So we're going to say if the body, remember, which is the body that's entering this area 2D, and we're going to say has method. Okay. Now, this is a term we've been using in class from time to time. Method, for all intents and purposes, is just kind of another name for a function. Okay, so we're going to look for a specific method in the body that is entering here. And we're going to say the method take damage. Now, take damage, as you remember from last week, is this custom function, this custom method we put on our enemy script. So now it's checking to see if the body that's entering has a method built in called take damage. All right, so if the body method has take damage, we're going to say body, which once again is going to be the enemy, dot take damage. So it's going to grab that take damage function now. Now our take damage function looks for an amount, okay? So, and when it runs, when it's called, it's going to take our current health and minus from it whatever amount is in there. So going back to our projectile script, we're going to now specify what is the amount of damage we want to take. Well, I want it to take this variable up here. So we're just going to type in damage. And this variable is connecting up to this variable here. Perfect. Okay, that is looking pretty good. I'm happy with that. We're going to come back to this code in a little bit because we're actually going to have a few problems we're going to fix. But I'm going to hit Control S to save this. So now that we've created the basic functionality behind our projectiles, now we need to go to our tower scene and actually instantiate and spawn in these projectiles. We've done instantiation quite a bit so far in this course. Now if we go to our main script here with our spawning enemy, we can kind of look at how the instantiation's done. The first thing it does is we create a variable called enemy, and we are going to grab our enemy spawn, which remember is where we get from preloading, okay? So, and then we instantiate it, and we say where it's going to be instantiated, and then we add it as a child. So we're going to do very similar things when we are instantiating our projectile. So I'm going to go to my tower scene here. You can see my little tower, not much to it, just a root node and a sprite. And let's attach a script onto there. All right, as always, make sure we're going into our scripts folder. Let's create that. And now let's start talking about our tower script. As always, let's create our variables first. I'm going to create a variable called projectile scene. And then we're going to use our friend preload again. Okay, now we can either scroll down here to find our projectile scene, or you can grab it from here and just drag it in. Either way is fine, both are acceptable. So now we have a variable called projectile scene, and when that is called, it's going to preload and get this scene ready for our use. So that's kind of what's happening here. Okay, and let's create a few more variables. We're going to create a variable called fire rate, and we're going to set it to 1.0. I'm specifying that it's going to be a float with a decimal place there, just in case we want to use decimal places later, not just relying on whole numbers. All right, and then we're going to create another variable called fire timer, and we're going to set that to 0. I'll explain what those variables do in a little bit. Essentially, what we're doing here is we are going to be creating our own custom timer. Now, you could use the timer node, absolutely. You know how to do that, and you're welcome to do that on your own. But let's learn a different way to also control a simple timer. Okay, now that we've got our variables, once again, now let's set up our functions. So we'll go to our good friend, the physics function. Let's just pass that out. And then we are going to create a new function. I'm going to call it shoot. Okay, you're welcome to call it what you would like. So there's the two functions we're going to have going, and let's get started on this. So in our shoot function, let's do this first. Let's think back to our main function here. We have to instantiate the scene, give it a position, and make it a child. So let's start by instantiating the scene. So we'll create a variable called projectile, and we're going to make that equal to our projectile scene dot instantiate. Okay, that's the first step. The next step is to set its instantiated position. When you instantiate something, you have to say where it's going to spawn in. So we're going to take our projectile dot position and make that equal to our global position, which is essentially just where our tower is. It's taking the global position of the object that this is on, which in this case is our tower. Okay. Now, we're actually going to do one more thing before we do the add child, okay? We actually have to set our projectile's direction now. Because if you remember in our projectile script, we have our direction zeroed out, waiting for input. Once again, later we're going to have it target the nearest enemy. But for now, I think I just want that projectile to move to the right. Let's keep it nice and simple, okay? So we're going to say projectile dot direction. Now, direction isn't a command that Godot recognizes. If I hover over top of it, it doesn't know what it is. Whereas global position, it's able to identify it. So what is direction? Well, it's accessing our direction variable from our projectile script. It's able to do that because we're instantiating it into the scene. So we're going to take our direction and make that equal to vector 2, and I'll give it a direction of 1, 0, which means it's just going to move on that number line, 1 on the x-axis, which is to the right, and 0 on the y. So it's just going to go to the right. It's not going to go up. It's not going to go down, right? And if you made it 1, 1, it's going to go diagonal to the bottom right, and you're welcome to change around these numbers and experiment with what they do at your own leisure. Now, you might be thinking, okay, I know what to do next. I'm just going to add the child and do that. But we're going to change it up just a little bit. Yes, we still need to add our instantiated object as a child, but what's happening here is we are actually working in a different scene. We're working in our tower scene. So if we were to add it as a child, this projectile would now be a child of the tower, not of the actual scene itself. Generally, that would be fine, but what might happen is later you might have a tower that gets destroyed, or maybe a tower that gets upgraded and you're removing that original tower. If we did that, we'd also be getting rid of all the children, all the projectiles. And we don't want our projectiles to go away. If the tower does, a projectile that's been shot, it's going to stay in the air even if the tower's not there. So we're going to add it as a child to the root scene, not the tower itself, but have the root scenes. For that, we're going to use a slightly different command. We're going to say get tree. What's a tree? Well, it's this family tree up here, right? The family tree with all the parents and the children that we've been talking about. Get tree, and then we're going to say get current scene. So get the scene that we're actively working in, okay? Initialize it, and then we're going to say add child projectile. So instead of adding it as a child to the tower scene, we're going to get the whole family tree, grab the current one we're using, and add it as a child to that, okay? Which is perfect. So now it's going to be added as a child to the main scene. So our shoot function is all done. It's looking good. Now what we can do into the physics process is we could call that scene. Now, if I'm going to run my game now, I'm not going to, but if I was to run the game, you're going to see my shoot function was going to run non-stop, and then eventually it would actually crash the computer. Okay, we don't want that to happen. So we're not going to just run the shoot function in the physics process directly because it's going to run it every frame, 60 frames a second. So let's create that timer system that we talked about here with fire rate and fire timer. So let's get rid of this. And let's do a few extra additions here to fix this up. So we're going to say fire timer minus delta. Now that's a basic timer right there. So what's going to happen is the fire timer is going to tick down 1 every second. So if the fire timer, for example, was 5, it would go 5, 4, 3, and so on. Okay, so it's going to tick it down just like as a normal stopwatch would. Okay, and then we're going to say if the fire timer is less than or equal to 0, now we can say shoot. So it's only going to shoot when that fire timer reaches 0. Here's the thing. Mine starts at 0. I'm starting it at 0 because when I place that tower, I want to be able to fire right away. But now I need to put that fire timer up to my fire rate. So we're going to go up to 1, then it'll count down to 0. When it gets to 0, it'll shoot, and then we want it to go back up to 1. So after we shoot, what we're going to do is now we're going to say fire timer equals fire rate. And now it's going to put that timer back up to 1 after it shoots. All right, let's do a little bit of a test here. I'm just going to add a few more tower spawn locations so we can kill our enemies a little bit easier as they're marching through the scene. And let's go test to see if everything is working. Right, so I'll put my towers, and as you can see, they are firing projectiles every second. And let's see what happens as our enemies cross them, see if they're taking that damage. And they indeed are. They are taking the damage. Now, what you might be noticing is the projectiles are actually passing straight through the enemy, and they aren't stopping. Okay, well, we want our projectiles to stop. And the other issue is if I was to leave this game running for a while, it would actually eventually crash my computer because all of these projectiles are now being tracked and monitored. We have to get their coordinates and positional data, and it's going to start slowing down the computer. We need to get rid of these projectiles when they leave the screen. Lots of ways to do that. We're going to keep it really simple to start, and we'll maybe come back to it later. But let's fix the passing through the enemies bit, and then we'll also fix the let's get them spawning when they get too far section. So we're going to go to our projectile here, and let's open up our projectile script. Okay, so here's what happens when it interacts with the body. So if the body has a method called take damage, we are going to have the thing take damage, and then we're just going to say, not Q redraw, sorry, Q free. Just going to erase it. We've done Q free before, and that'll erase the projectile once it enters the body's collider. Okay, perfect. Then the next thing we're going to do is this is what moves our projectile when it's spawning. So we can just do a really simple if statement here. We can say if the position on the X, is greater than 1,000, okay, Q free. All right, so let's go test that out. And now you can see they're deleting. Now 1,000 is obviously not enough. I probably want to set this to 2,000 or 1,500 so they're off screen. But you can see they're hitting our trolls now. They're not passing through when they hit our trolls, and they are deleting. And we could run this game forever if we wanted to. We're getting really close to that core gameplay loop now. So thanks, everybody. Hope you found this lesson helpful. And if you have any questions, feel free to find me in the tech lab. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.